Welcome to the Bleep Bulimia podcast with guest Leanne, Ellington, self-image scientist. Hi everyone, I am Leanne. I am the host of Bleep Bulimia, and today I am so excited to have Leanne Ellington here. She is a self-image scientist, which is really interesting. We're going to find out what that is all about. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be here, Leanne.
So now, here's the thing. Tell me your story.
Yeah. Well, what brought me to be who I am today, my father took me to Weight Watchers when I was 8 years old, and he wasn't, trying to do anything harmful to me. He was just trying to help me. But from there on out, food and, my body became this very personal, emotional thing. Enough is enough point. And through a lot of the wrong ways and maybe some of the right ways, I went on and lost close to 100 pounds. But that was only one piece of it. My physical body transformed, but what I realized, there was a big cost to my weight loss, which was, first of all, I developed horrible disordered eating and self-image and body image issues to get there. And not to mention, when I got there on the other side, I still didn't see myself. I was still seeing myself through what I call fat goggles. I still had like 100 pounds on my body in my brain. And that never went away as well. And that's only because I never addressed the self-image and body image that was causing me to think and act and feel and behave the way that I was. Not to mention, those disordered eating habits where I was either, obsessing, controlling, dieting, weighing, measuring, or the flip side, feeling, compulsively addicted to sugar, binging, overeating, emotionally eating, all of the things. So there was no middle ground for me. And that's because my inner demons, so to speak, never really got addressed. And there was still that mental wiring that was left that was causing all of the disorder. And so that's why, that's really what got me started on the subject of, I started dedicating my life to the study of the female brain and the self-image, because that's where I realized through a series of quarter life crises that was the missing link for me. And so that's why, fast forward to today, I've made it my mission to help women really understand the intricacies of their brain and self-image so that they can heal their deeper struggles that they might think is a food problem or is a willpower problem. I show them that it lives deeper in the brain, the self-image, the identity of who they think they are. And I've made it my mission to help women heal from that without all of the restriction and obsession and shame. And that's what my stressless eating system has grown to be. It's a science-backed, non-diet, non-therapy approach that I've been honing in for close to 15 years. But really it started because that was what I needed and it wasn't available to me. And the world was throwing more diet and exercise plans at my deeper struggles. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of everything.
I love it because that's one thing I'm really big on, no dieting. I started at 18 with my struggles. I gained a bunch of weight at 17, and then somebody introduced me to bulimia well, first dieting,
Yeah.
right? And then the bulimia.
Yep.
And it was it's horrible and it's tormenting. At first you don't think it is. But then it becomes that. And to go 30 years of struggling with it was just like pathetic. Once I got over it, and I'm going to be hitting 14 years of none, it was definitely what you're saying. Although I did read a book at one time by Joan Borisenko, which spoke to that, no dieting and listening to, yes. So this is why I love having you here, because this is my philosophy too. Going back to her after when I finally gave it up, going back to that, I thought, that was always in the back of my brain, but I didn't listen. And you have to listen. This is the way to go. Balancing your mind and not restricting, like those are awful things to do.
Right.
So
Yeah, and it's easier said than done when we've learned it, right? And so one of the big things, and it's so true, like you have to make that decision to say like, no, I've hit that enough is enough point. I need to heal the deeper struggles. And one of the biggest things that comes up for women is like, I want to stop dieting. I want to stop restricting, but I don't know how. Like it's all I've ever known. I've known it since I was a child. I've known it since all of adulthood, whatever that is. And so to that, I say, part of it is like, if you grew up learning that diet mentality, right? It's almost like it's a language. It's like you learned, metaphorical Spanish growing up, right? And if you want to learn French, you have to go learn a new paradigm, a new language, right? But it's like, wait a minute, Leanne, you're telling me to stop controlling the one thing I've been trying to control my entire life. And that's where the big distinction lies, is where it's like, yes, I am inviting you to get off that count, weigh, measure, track, control, restrict, obsession bandwagon, because ironically, the more you try to control food, the more out of control we feel. So control is not a worthy and doable like system or approach, right? But what I am saying, because then it's the flip side. It's like, well, Leanne, if I'm not dieting, I'm going to go off the deep end. I'm going to lose control. I'm going to gain a bunch of weight. And so what I'm saying is, yes, let's get rid of the obsession and the restriction, because we already identified it's not helping, it's making it worse. But what does need to happen is we need to replace it with a new system of thinking. We need to go learn that metaphorical French so that you actually have the influence over yourself that you want to have, that you thought that controlling and micromanaging was going to do, but it never did and it never will do. But you do need to replace it with a new system of thinking, or else you will feel out of control. And that's why a lot of my clients, they're like, Leanne, intuitive eating didn't necessarily work for me because they never learned how to connect with their body. They never learned what hunger was. They've only known how to base what they're eating on a calorie or a carb or a macro or a right, wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't. And that's why it's so important to replace it and teach your brain a new system of thinking, or else you'll feel off the deep end the other direction. So it's so powerful what you just said.
I love what you brought up too about the hunger part, not being able to manage that because they're not aware of it. And that was a big thing for me in my recovery was learning that, at the slower eating, the taking your time, the enjoying the food, and like food's my friend now. And at one point it was my friend in a bad way, and now it's my friend in a good way, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But you're so
Absolutely.
right about that, managing your hunger. Like,
Yeah. Well,
right?
it becomes a foreign topic, right? Because what happens is when we are so focused on the food itself, and that's the thing, every woman I talk to that's stuck inside disordered eating, eating disorders, or just that obsessive cycle, all they want to do is think about food less. That's why I talk about like, let's turn off the part of your brain that's obsessed with food, right? But it's like, well, I don't know how, because everything is telling me to like, well, then focus on my hunger cues and then focus on this. And it's still focusing on food. So what happens is when it's so food focused, right? What happens is our body by default, we have no idea how to actually connect with our body, because by extension, we're outsourcing our attention span to the food itself. And as a result, we're disconnected from our body. We have no idea how to even look for signals, what our body's telling us. And so part of it is really, and then it's the big one, the huge one is the distinction between physical hunger and then that emotional hunger. Because 9 times out of 10, right, we are not eating because we're hungry, right? Every once in a while, it's like, okay, I'm like so tired of, or I'm so hungry from dieting or trying to air quotes be good that like, screw it, I have to eat whatever. So that falls in some categories, right? But oftentimes that uncontrollable hunger is you could eat and eat and eat, and 10 minutes later you're hungry. And it's because it's filling a void that's emotional or it's spiritual or it's mental, and it's never going to be filled by food. And so it's like, wait a minute, if I'm just looking at, am I hungry or am I not hungry? That's also not going to be enough, because we just established a lot of times we're not eating because we're hungry. We're eating because there's some emotional void that needs to be filled. And that's up in the brain and the nervous system and the thoughts and the beliefs and the identity. And that's why, again, it's not a food problem, even though it so feels like a food problem.
That's huge with bulimia. Because I
Yes,
mean, you eat
absolutely.
your emotions, but you don't want anyone to know it. And I had a sister-in-law who was quite overweight. She was about 450 pounds. And I would sit with her and I'm going, you know what? I can completely connect with you. The only thing is that people don't see it in me. They see it in you.
Yeah,
If you get
absolutely.
what I'm saying, is
Yeah,
I'm
it's the
hiding
because right.
exactly what she's doing. She's going to food for emotional support, and I was doing the same, only I eliminated it afterwards. But she said, and she
Absolutely.
thanked me for being that way and being that honest. I mean, I just love the
Yeah,
lady so much. But
for
it was
sure.
true. It's overeaters, bulimics. There's a very close line to that. The only thing is that they
Absolutely.
can't see it in us.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Our problem with food is invisible. It doesn't
Yes.
manifest physically necessarily. Like, yes, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. That's why it's like you can't judge a book by its cover, right? Who's to say that I'm struggling any less if I don't have more weight on my body? Who's to say I'm struggling any less if I do have more weight on my body? It's not a physiological problem, even though it feels like one. And so whether you are eating and not purging, or whether you're eating and purging through actual, like making yourself throw up, or purging through exercise, right? Or laxatives or anything like that, any type of excretion, right? It's coming back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that it's a sense of control. But that's the cosmic joke, that it's such a false sense of control. We think we're in control, but actually what we feel is so out of control. And then no matter which way you sit on the spectrum, shame is going to be the biggest player in this game. Whether you are purging or whether you're not, and you're physiologically carrying the weight with you that you ate, shame about what you are doing, shame is that toxic killer. And that's what does shame need to survive? Secrecy, right? So whether you're eating in secrecy or purging in secrecy, right? It's a secret. It becomes our dirty little secret. And there's so much shame associated with that. And that's why it's so important, I believe, to find somebody who's been through what you've actually gone through to help you alleviate your problem. Because again, you'll never be able to get help from somebody who's never experienced those deeper struggles. They might be able to help you on a logic and reason level, but we've already established this is not a logical and reasonable problem. It's emotional, it's deep-seated in our brain and self-image. And so whether it's manifesting as weight gain or whether it's manifesting as a very slim, lean body, right? We don't know what problem somebody is facing, and we shouldn't judge, because again, this problem, the disordered eating or the eating disordered and the self-image and body image that comes alongside it, it's like a cancer that needs to get cut out, but it's also invisible. We can't necessarily see it.
That's beautifully said. And you're absolutely right. The control thing, like it's I don't control anything anymore. I'm really happy about that. And I can't control my life or my future. And I understand that. Sure. And sometimes, I mean, I'm talking to my daughter just in the sense of controlling the future, wanting to control the future, what's going to happen in the future. And you cannot. And I don't think that I did for the most part, but that I think is also a fear, right? So if you can't control the future, you try and control something that's today and you're eating and so on. And it's not going to help. It's not going to help.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And it's that that false sense of control. But here's the big distinction. Yeah, you're right. We can't control anything, but what we can do is we can influence. We can influence our today, we can influence our future, and we can influence who we choose to show up as in the face of our circumstances. So the name of this podcast is Bleep Bulimia, right? You do not have to like your bulimia. In fact, you can outright hate it. You can be mad at it. But right now, the first step, I believe, is this accepting that it is part of your story right now. And even when you don't like it, right? I think there's a toxic positivity culture out there that's like, oh my gosh, you should just love it all or put a positive spin on it or whatever. And it's like, no, you don't have to like it. The first step is actually accepting it, because once you accept it and acknowledge, like, no, I don't like this. I don't want it to be part of my future. But without the shame, without the blame, without the guilt, without the comparisonitis, without the self, criticism and self-hate, just accepting that it is. Because again, what's the alternative? It's in the past, it's already happened, right? And so in order to influence right now, the first step is we just have to accept that, like, okay, this is what's happening right now. Again, I don't have to like it, but I refuse to be a victim to it, or I refuse to take myself down that emotional rabbit hole. And who do I want to be in the face of this? How do I draw that line in the sand? How do I get the help that I need? And that of course, as you know, is a different conversation in itself, because first you have to get to that point where that enough is enough point where I don't believe it needs to be a deep, dark rock bottom, but you do have to get to that point where you realize that, a food-based approach or outdated systems or all the things that we tried that didn't work for a reason. And we need to break out the power tools, and we need to figure out, like, take a radically different approach to our solution, because if the other things would have worked, they would have worked by now, right? But like, you do have to get to that point where you're like, no, I'm so done. Enough is enough. Been around the monster long enough. Want to change it from the root, not just the symptoms. And that in itself, as you know, is a whole separate conversation. But that's where the healing begins, and that's how you really influence your future and stop bringing your past with you into your future. But yeah, you can't control it, but you can absolutely influence it, and that's a personal choice that we can all cultivate.
I love that. I love that saying, the influencing. That's so beautiful. and it
Thank you.
removes that whole, pressure thing, right?
Sure,
It's like,
absolutely. And it is a surrender. It's a surrender. It's
yeah,
like, oh my gosh, I actually don't know what I don't know. And
yeah.
I need help. And a lot of people confuse that as weakness, but I think it's such beautiful strength when we say, like, no, I need help. I can't do this on my own. I don't want to do it on my own. I need to help saving myself from this disorder and the dis-ease in my brain. Because that's where, if we're talking about a disease or whatever, it's not a physiological disorder or dis-ease where there's lack of ease in your brain, or there's your nervous system is nervous, but that's where it's again acknowledging, am I solving the right problem? And that's where eating disorders and disordered eating, it feels like it's a food problem. But if there's one thing that I hope people get from this interview today, is that it's in your brain, it's in your beliefs, it's in your self-image, and until you address that, it will keep manifesting as a food problem.
It's an interesting fact because I still remember when I was bulimic, where I would have my brain telling me you want to eat, and I can still remember feeling my body. This was near the end, going, "We don't want you to do this. Like, we don't
Yeah.
want you to do this. Like, you're hurting us. Like, just
Yeah.
because your brain wants to." And it's funny because we were talking in another podcast about that, connecting your body to your brain.
Yep.
And I mean, if you talk to your stomach or your heart or anything like that, and your brain's sitting there going, "I want food," but your heart and your body's going to say, "No, your tummy, you're hurting us."
Yeah,
It's a really
absolutely.
interesting thought. And I'm going, yeah, like, I mean, you're all one, but the brain's so powerful. And you're right, you need help to overcome that power of wanting and understanding it. I know it's really weird. I'm
Yeah.
probably getting really weird right
Well,
now, but I'm
no, well,
serious. I
it's
talk to my
true.
body.
Yeah, well, it is. It's a sensory mismatch, right? It's what's going
Yeah.
on physiologically is almost lying to us. So,
Yes.
I'll just give an example. Okay. So right now, until this, I'll give you like a old example, like the old way and the new way, like the old brain and the new brain after healing, right? So the old brain, or maybe it's the current brain, right? When I talk about beliefs that drive the behaviors, because people think it's the behaviors, we got to address the actions, the behaviors, the doing it. It's like, no, we've got to start at the beliefs, right? So if I have a belief that when I'm sad, when I'm lonely, when I'm X, fill in the blank, food will make me feel better. And it's not conscious, it's subconscious, it's unconscious, right? But what we're saying is, oh, I'm sad, I'm lonely, I need comfort, I'm bored, I'm whatever. Food will make me feel better, or food is the thing that is my go-to right now. But when we get in our conscious brain and we look at the beliefs, it's like we could tear that down and be like, well, actually, no, when I'm sad, food will not only not fill that gap of sadness, but now it's going to add an extra layer of shame and cognitive dissonance because I know it's not doing anything. And then 5 minutes later, I'm going to be hungry, right? But again, it's not going to fill the void of sadness, right? Or if I'm lonely, not only will it not fill that gap of loneliness, but it's going to add, again, an extra layer of shame. Or stress. When I'm stressed, food will make me feel better. Actually, no, not only will it not fill that gap of stress, it's going to add a new level of stress. And then the new belief has to be something along the lines of, actually, again, it won't make me less stressed, it'll make me more stressed, but what I really need is X. And that's the X, that's the big X that is beyond the scope of this conversation. But that X is, what does it take for me to be emotionally available to myself in this moment? When I'm stressed, what will actually fill the stress? When I'm lonely, what will actually fill the loneliness? When I feel hopeless and alone and isolated, what will actually fill that void? Because food will never fill it. When I'm stressed, what's a healthy coping mechanism so I can be mentally and physically and emotionally available to myself to relieve that stress? That's the part that nobody teaches us and we'll never get from a diet. So again, it's that sensory mismatch where it feels like a physical urge, but it's your brain tapping you on the shoulder, tapping on the shoulder, tapping on the shoulder, saying, I need something that you're not giving me. And it's a matter of learning how to give our brain what it needs so that our body doesn't lie to us and take over.
I love it. That's beautifully said.
Thank
Absolutely
you.
perfect. Love it.
It
So tell
resonates,
us,
doesn't it? It's
it,
because
it
you
really
can feel,
does.
you
I
can
mean,
see both brains. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And you're right. And to be very conscious of it, I'm acutely conscious of the fact that boredom, tiredness, those also will cause that. And I'll sit there and go, I'm really not hungry, but I want to eat. So what's going on
Yep.
here? Okay, go rest. Or, if
Yeah.
you're bored, go do something. If you don't want to do
Absolutely.
something, you go rest, like whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Uh,
And when you
but
fired
it's
wire
conscious.
new beliefs one time, and that's the cool thing about doing these beliefs overhauls that I'm talking about. When you go through the process that I take my clients through, you do it one time, and then that belief just becomes your new belief, and you ingrain it for a few days. But then it just, because making sure, obviously, this is the one disclaimer, that the new belief resonates. Like, it's got to resonate. When things don't resonate, they actually lay down something called negative neuroassociations. And our long-term storage brain basically just says, I'm not going to need that. She's not going to be doing that very long, right? So if you're forcing yourself, persuading yourself, convincing yourself, or trying to like talk yourself into something, your brain isn't going to download it as a long-term forever habit. What it needs is positive neuroassociations where it resonates, if we're talking about beliefs, or if we're talking about habits, it needs to have like pleasure or ease or just not painful. Like, you can't be persuading, convincing yourself, right? To lay down those positive neuroassociations. And that's the key. That's like the magic ingredient for getting these long-term habits to stick in our brain, so that you're not having to consciously like tell yourself every time, like, no, you're not bored. Here's what to do when you're bored. It just becomes the new unconscious, subconscious belief that you just walk around with, and you don't have to think about it anymore. So it's a process, but it just completely frees you of so much mental real estate.
I like that. Mental real estate. You have to write that down. Uh, that is absolutely fantastic. So, a little bit more. So you have, obviously you help people go through this. Can you tell us, like, I would like to know a little bit more about your process and also where to find you and everything like that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So basically the way it works is stressless eating is really designed, like I said, to help people turn off the part of their brain that's obsessed with food and just really get their life back. And so to do that, a part of it is, like I said, it's got to be part systematic and then part self-image and the identity piece of the puzzle. Because the truth is that at the end of the day, I could give you my stressless eating strategy that I give all my clients and teach you how to, again, a new language and a new system of thinking around food that gets easier the more you process it and practice it, that you get better at it the more you practice it, versus, dieting and disorder just gets worse. We get worse at it. We never become that way of thinking, right? It's always disordered. But I could just straight up, teach your brain how to do that. But if we don't go identify those weeds in the garden of your mind that are sabotaging you or keeping you from trusting yourself or just straight up setting you up to fail, or stuck in the identity of just, like, this is just who I am, this is how it's always going to be, right? You will always end up right back where you are right now, because you can't out strategize, you can't outperform, you can't outsmart those beliefs and that identity and that self-image, right? So it's got to be both. So when I say both, it's like, yes, you need a new system of thinking and a new language in your brain, like a new strategy, so that the food side of things becomes simple and stressless and sustainable. And again, the key word here is sustainable. Learn it one time, have it forever, but it gets easier the more you practice it, right? But also the stories and the thinking and the self-image that you actually need to make all of that all happen. And that's what my stressless eating system was designed to do. So how it works is I take women through this like 16-week incubation process, basically, where they set aside 16 weeks of their life, and we heal the problem for good, not patch it up with diets, not put band-aids on the problem. I mean, address it at the root, put it to bed for good, so that they have freedom for the rest of their life. And so the way I do that is stressless eating has 3 distinct phases, and I'll just share a little bit about each one. So the first one, I call it unwire rewire, which is just like it says it is, because we've got to kind of unbrainwash ourselves of the diet mentality and the disorder, and reverse kind of the brain damage of chronic dieting and disorder, and all of the stories and the beliefs in ourselves image that are perpetuating the cycles. And then, of course, learn that language, that paradigm that I call stressless eating. So that's phase 1. Phase 2 is called self-imaging. So just like we talked about a second ago, a strategy is kind of meaningless if your subconscious self-image is trying to sabotage you or doesn't truly believe that you're worthy of healing this. And so we need to go create a new default self-image that just becomes who you are. But it can't be this ambiguous, like, oh, just love yourself the way you are, kind of, fake positivity that the world is giving us, right? I'm talking taking a systematic and scientific approach to self-love and self-trust and earning back your own trust and actually transforming the way that you see yourself. And that's what I mean by self-imaging. And then phase 3 is experimentation. That's where we put it all together, take everything from phase 1 and phase 2, put it into practice and how it lives out in the real world. And this is where I call it a big fat experiment, because it's a series of guided short experiments designed to really, help them learn what works for their brain, learn what doesn't, and really, figure out their own unique success recipes, because everyone is totally different. And we do that by simply using all the tools that are available to them now in their toolbox from phase 1 and phase 2. And so that's how we get to just go really hardwire their brain for that permanent freedom, so that they can just go live the rest of their life, and food and all of the stories and kind of lies in their head can no longer trigger them or control them, again. And so that's how my stressless eating program is actually laid out and structured. And then if anyone is interested in just, really learning more about this concept of, okay, well, how do I turn off the part of my brain that's obsessed with food? How do I actually, rewire my brain? And so if you want to learn more about that and really rewire your brain for peace and freedom, I've literally just peeled back the curtain and walked you through the exact strategy that I teach my own clients. And so if you want to heal yourself from that all or nothing diet mentality, the restriction, the disorder that you might be left with, whether it's acute or just residual, but without, restricting or punishing your body, and definitely without using words like macros and low carb or calorie burn, you can check out my free masterclass. It's over on stresslesseating.com. And again, I just lay it all out and peel back the curtain for you.
Oh, that's so beautiful. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. It was funny when you were
Absolutely.
talking about when you lost the weight and you still looked in the mirror and you saw yourself still. I'm sorry. I thought a lot of people think it's a woman thing, but I just loved the movie with The Rock where he was in high school and he was overweight, and then he meets up with Kevin Hart. I don't remember the name of the movie, but
Yeah.
because he was a chubby child, and then later on he was like fit like anything, like The Rock. But
Yep.
when he would look in the mirror, he would see his old self.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
that movie was about accepting that, no, you're not that person anymore. And yes, you're right. The brain will play games on you on that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Well, first of all, I want to check out that movie now. So
yeah,
I'll
just
just
look
Google
up
The
The
Rock
Rock
and
and
Kevin
Kevin
Hart.
Hart.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's
But
a
yeah,
really cute and fun movie.
Yeah,
Oh
no,
my
I love
goodness,
what you
yeah.
just said too, because it's so true. We can't outsmart, we can't out diet, we can't out weight loss our current self-image and identity. And I mean it with so much love, and I don't mean it to be harsh, but like until we address that mental wiring in our brain, we will always end up right back where we are right now. It literally is just science. We always end up back in alignment with what our self-image and identity tells us we are. And that's the part that needs to get addressed. And again, that's the part that'll never be addressed by just looking at it like a food or weight problem.
No, you can work out and become the most fit person in the world,
Yeah,
and still not feel good about yourself because you're still looking at that old person because that's how it was there. And I'm sorry, I
exactly.
know I have to do this. I have to do this.
You checking out where the movie is?
I'm going to find out. Yeah, in the Rock movie. See, it says it there. Um, Central Intelligence. That's what
Okay,
it's
Central
called.
Intelligence. Awesome. I love it. A
Just for the
self-image love
listeners, if they're
story.
sitting there, what was she talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's really, really good. I just have so enjoyed having you on here, and
Yes.
your message has been absolutely wonderful. Um, I know my listeners will completely be able to resonate with what you said today. And
Thank you.
so listeners, look it up and just give us your website one last time, Leanne.
Yeah. So if you want to turn off the part of your brain that's obsessed with food and really learn how to rewire it, I've laid out that entire system over on stresslesseating.com. And then if you just want to learn more about anything, I have 2 podcasts, books, all the things, you can head on over to leanneellington.com. So myname.com, and you can find out more about all the things that I'm up to. So.
And listeners, that will all be in the notes as well. So make sure you visit Leanne. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you so much, Lorianne.
I do to you. Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit me at bleepbulimia.com.